Chapter 7, 11 Steps That Make the Deal. You can leapfrog to quantum success, but you still have to do the deals one sure-footed step at a time. Throughout this book, I've told you over and over to make decisions, incur risk, and take immediate action. You can guess by now that I've never been one to sit around and cogitate, especially when I knew that swift, decisive action would make the difference between a vice-like grip on a multi-million-dollar deal and a handful of air. I couldn't have made 75,000 business decisions during my career by hesitating in the clutch. Author's note: while I don't keep track as I used to, one by one, but I am fairly certain that the business decisions I have now made are closer to 100,000. End of author's note. Warren Buffett puts it another way: never suck your thumb. He looks at whatever information he needs, makes up his mind quickly, and takes action on his decision. He calls any unnecessary sitting and thinking thumb-sucking. When the legendary Andrew Carnegie asked young Napoleon Hill if he wanted to embark on the enormous task of distilling the characteristics of the 500 richest men in the world, he pulled out a stopwatch and, unknown to Hill, gave him just 60 seconds to make his decision. Hill took just 26 seconds to accept a challenge that would take him on a 20-year quest. Old man Carnegie knew the value of decisiveness as an essential attribute to completing an epic task such as Hill's. Being careful doesn't mean moving slow any more than taking immediate action means you have to rush in unprepared and do something stupid. We all make decisions in our lives, even trivial ones, based on several types of input information available: previous experience, intuition, and advice of others. You decide where to take your car to be serviced. You decide how to handle your health insurance and who to hire as an administrative assistant. If you take time to weigh the factors involved in these relatively minor decisions, how infinitely more complex must the process that takes you and your business from an initial idea to closing of a deal worth tens of millions. In this chapter, we walk through the 11 steps you need to take, hell, you better take, between your bright idea and the time seeming millennium later, when an ink hits contract paper or when it's a matter of history. At my seminars, I look into the hopeful faces of hundreds of modestly successful business owners, building entrepreneurs, frustrated wannabes, and of course, the usual seminar groupies, perennials who would attend a group dynamic seminar held by mass murderer Charlie Manson. Unfortunately, most of them came to hear me say, now you just keep a positive attitude because you're a special person and your dream will come true. But you know me well enough now to realize they'll never ever hear that feely-good crap from Dan Pena. Not because I wish it weren't true. Hell, I wish it was. But life is like a balancing scale. You have to balance what you get with what you're willing to give up, period, regardless of what they expected me to say. Most, if not all of them, come into the seminar with at least the germ of an idea for making money. At the close of every seminar, I solicit their ideas by inviting them to send me a one-page fax that explains their deal. Not one word more, or I shit can it. And over time, I'm deluged with ideas. Some of them are even good ideas. Author's note: I don't stare into the abyss or the eyes of hundreds anymore. This century, about since 2000, I only give my seminars at my week-long experience at the castle, where we put in something in excess of 20 to 24 people. I find it much more rewarding for me and for the students because I can keep them accountable. I've also, since the writing of this, instituted a very strenuous follow-up program where for 1 year I mentor you for free, and I keep track with monthly Zoom calls and weekly reports. End of author's note. The point is that everybody in your life and in your organization has a money-making idea sometime. You pick up a tip from a loose list broker. You read a small item on page 5 of the business section. You overhear a scrap of conversation, and a small voice inside you says, "Hey, that would be good." For our purposes, a deal is an equity transaction that generates income. It could be public stock offering or an acquisition of another company. Since I've made so many tons of money buying and selling equity, I'll use acquisition as an example. This is a side note on the page. Fly first class, you're not going to find a deal in row 38 sitting behind Joe Lugnut and his family. The biggest deal in my life at Great Western Resources began with a chance conversation on a commercial flight from Houston to Denver. In the late summer of 1986, Charlie Soliday, my chief financial officer, happened to sit next to an executive at MAPCO, a large multinational energy corporation based in Kentucky. Occasionally, some moron will ask, "Why do you always fly first class?" That's a lot to pay for free drinks and silverware. Of course, with as much as I travel, I upgrade with frequent flyer miles, but in case you haven't heard, top executives fly first class so they can strike up conversations with other executives, and conversations can lead to deals, and that lead to more deals and more revenue. You're not going to find a deal in the row 38 sitting beside Joe Lugnut and his family. Author's note. With recent change in tax laws, most of top executives fly first class basically only with frequent flyer miles, or they upgrade themselves. End of author's note. So this energy executive, confident and relaxed, confided into Charlie he was working on a project to acquire the assets of a Canadian energy company's U.S. subsidiary, a firm called Bow Valley USA. The banks, including Citicorp Canada, were squeezing Bow Valley's multi-billion-dollar parent company for repayment of loans, so it was planning to liquidate assets to pay down the debt load. As usual, Charlie was paying attention. He recognized that this guy, in a moment of accidental indiscretion, had inadvertently opened a window of potential benefit for Great Western. To appreciate the significance of what was happening here, you need to understand where the oil industry was in the summer of '86. Due to the worldwide oversupplies, the oil recession was deepening by the day. The spot price of oil had dropped from $28 a barrel in January to less than $10 by June. That seems like an eternity ago, with the present day price around $125 a barrel. Great Western stock had plummeted from £3, or about $3.50 on the London Stock Exchange in December 1984, to about 50 pence, or 80 cents, by late June of '86. Even the monetary exchange of dollars to pounds worked against this. Author's note. Having thought that I'd never see the price of oil plummet like that again, currently the price of oil is approximately $45 a barrel, having hit as low as approximately $25 a barrel earlier this year in 2016, down from $120 a barrel approximately 2 years ago in summer 2014. End of author's note. Every company in the oil industry was digging in, assuming the fetal position and covering its head to wait out the recession. That was fine with me. I had decided that Great Western was not going to participate in the recession. I knew this was the perfect time to make the quantum leap we'd been waiting for. If we could just find the right acquisition out there in the bone-filled desert of distressed energy companies. I knew the financing was there for the right deal. I knew that we could move quickly across the terrain in our search because nobody else was out there looking to expand. They were all quivering under their boardroom tables. We had already looked at a lot of possible deals, but so far nothing quite right had come along until Charlie met his talkative new friend. So as soon as he landed in Denver, Charlie called me in the office in Houston and reported what he'd heard. Mark and I immediately sat down and began to kick around ideas and postulate some possible strategies for somehow getting a piece of what might be a major opportunity for quantum growth that Charlie had uncovered. What we were doing was taking step one. Step one, identify the idea. This is absolutely the first thing you have to do. Define and clarify exactly what you want to do for the deal you want to develop. Not only do you and your partners have to agree on this basic strategy of the idea, you have to agree that it may be feasible and will benefit the company. Just as important, if it proves to be feasible, you will have the desire to do it. In many cases, the major benefit of an idea is not so much profit-driven as it is a vehicle to move you closer to your long-range vision of your company. My vision for Great Western was for it to become a natural resource company and a major player in the international energy industry. And my grand strategy for achieving these goals, as you may recall, was through external growth through acquisition versus internal growth through continuing oil drilling and production. We were established in the oil and gas, but Bow Valley's assets were based 75% in coal and mining operations. Was there an opportunity here for us to look beyond our oil and gas-based assets to something larger? Could our little Great Western snake digest so large an egg? Or, as we often said, could the minnow swallow the whale? Looking through that brief passing window of opportunity, we had a lot of thinking to do about how to shape an idea into a plan. My instincts, which I knew were almost never wrong, told me immediately that this was the deal we had to make the breakthrough into energy big league. As I've said in a previous chapter, the deal was obviously hot. I didn't have it to run to a spreadsheet. This was Pamela Anderson running up the beach stark naked toward me saying, "Dan, here I am. Take me." You bet, Pamela. Somehow, some way, we had to make this son of a bitch happen. Yet another factor that urged me to go for it. We had achieved a string of conquests that had begun with taking the company public. Our people were confident, even cocky, about taking the whole energy industry. We were young, undefeated, obviously immortal, and ready for a title fight. The mood at Great Western was electric, with anticipation of our victory. I would have found it hard to deny them and deny me a shot at the big one, a shot at glory. But no matter how eager, even bloodthirsty we were, we still had to follow the 11 steps. It was the process we needed to discipline our actions and to train and prepare our minds and spirits for the battle we were contemplating. There were even more basic reasons for giving shape and form to our idea. If you rush past step one, you and your partners may well be hurtling down different paths of thought, pursuing different objectives until it's too late to regroup and re-strategize. Just like getting overrun by the enemy in battle, it's nearly impossible to recover your original positions. Another reason to identify the idea is that you'll need to communicate it to others in your organization. You may be working nights and weekends to bring it to fruition. And at times like this, virtually everybody is working nights. In addition, of course, you'll have to commit your idea to paper with crystal precision to investment bankers, brokerage firms. Nervous shareholders will understand your objectives and support them. Again, we're talking about clarifying your vision. Funny thing about fuzzy idea, it doesn't stick to paper very well. Once you've identified and agreed upon the nature of your idea, not the details, its potential for benefit to your company, you're ready for step two. Step two, investigate generalities. More specifically, investigate before you invest. Effort and especially money you could more profitably allocate somewhere else. Any action being taken by another organization, group, or individual which may impact you or your company raises key questions that must be answered. Why was MAPCO, a Kentucky coal company, interested in Bow Valley oil and gas assets as its coal interests? We learned that they wanted to purchase the company, then flipped oil and gas assets over for resale for a tidy, no-risk profit. Why should Bow Valley sell assets direct to Great Western? They reasoned when they could buy those same assets, mark them up, and sell them to us. More to the point, why sell to a much smaller company such as Great Western with no apparent financial horsepower and certainly not as strong as MAPCO? That was the conventional wisdom they were using. What was Bow Valley's financial status? What was the extent of its operations in Canada, the U.S., and worldwide? How strong were its coal contracts? With whom and under what terms? We had volumes of investigation to do quickly, but we couldn't afford not to turn over every rock and look beneath it. Investigation is the research for red flags. How many red flags do you need to see? 1, read your investigative reports and listen to your intuition. When the first red flag pops up, when you get an answer you're not comfortable with or don't get the answer at all, exit immediately. The tiniest wrinkle in the fabric, the smallest contradiction can explode in your face later. Our red flag checklist, as well as the 11 steps to execution, are listed in Appendix C and A. Investigation is an integral part of a high performance, and it is vital to protect the interests of the high performance individual who runs the company. These days, I'm pursuing deals potentially even larger than anything we did at Great Western. So I retain the services of a full-time private investigator, even now, who looks into every company I even think about seriously, and every person I consider hiring or becoming associated with. We call them targets. That means you do more than call up the references on a resume or chat with a few happy customers who are pre-selected and conveniently listed in a company presentation piece. If you're thinking about doing a deal, you need to check out two targets: the company and the individual principals of the company. So where do you start? You start with what you know. Full name of a person, address, approximate age, occupation, a name of his or her company. Basic information can come from business cards, industry directories, and the Standard & Poor's directory, telephone directories, conversations with others in the industry, and annual reports. When you're waiting in a lobby of an outer office, don't pick up the damn Time magazine. Check the desks and walls for awards, certificates, photographs, and diplomas with specific information you can jot down. Author's note: in 2016, while those are still places to get information, with Google and LinkedIn, I mean, every bit of information that you will need, almost every bit of information that you'll need, will come from public records. End of author's note. While you're in the executive office, look around, direct discreetly as you chat. Compliment your host on some of the piece of artwork or knickknack and get him to talk about himself. If you spot evidence of a common interest or background, golf, fishing, travel, military experience, use that as a lever to pry out more information. People, even busy executives, enjoy talking about themselves, and you should enjoy listening. Information is only hearsay until you confirm it. How many times have you accepted credentials on a resume, for example, without checking them independently? You read Notre Dame BS 78 major structural engineering on a handsome resume from a likely prospect. You pick up the phone and call the administration office, School of Engineering at Notre Dame. If they never heard of your prospect, that's a red flag, and all you need to terminate the consideration. Begin the verifying process with the names of individual targets. The easiest thing in the world is to have business cards printed with an alias. Call the county register of voters to check voter registration to confirm and complete names, addresses, and dates of birth. A lot of records are filled with at the county level. At the county recorder's office, you can investigate an individual or a company by calling the county recorder and requesting a general index listing all filings involving your targets, including document title, document number, any other parties involved, and the date filed. Filings with the county recorder may include property documents, deeds, grantee, grantor deeds, tax liens, notices of default, judgments, and power of attorneys. Civil suits and criminal records are a valuable source of information, but the procedures required to search these files vary from county to county and state to state. Rather than getting bogged down in an infinite number of bureaucratic variables, let's talk about the area of investigation in general terms so that you understand why an in-depth investigation is important. Check to see if the individual has a pattern of litigation. Civil litigation files are kept in the county level and federal district level. While you're checking the individual targets, check the company for litigation as well. You might find civil suits over breach of contract or debt payment defaults. Anybody can be sued for anything, of course, but as the principal of the target company or the company itself has record of breaching contract suits, you need to know before you make the decision. Check to see what law firms they use while you're at it. A high-profile law firm means they are sued and sue often. That's often combative and are willing to pay top dollar to enter and win a suit. That's good to know up front. It's also good to know if the guys who may soon be smiling at you from across the table have criminal records. Check them out long before you sit down at the table. You may not realize it, but criminal conviction information is available in many county and state levels as well as the federal level. Arrest information, by contrast, is not available in most states. Begin with the county clerk's office and check your target for both felony and misdemeanor convictions. Check at the state and federal levels as well. Again, procedures vary. The point here is to check for past criminal convictions. You can do all this yourself, of course, but by now you can understand why I might have a good experienced private investigator expedite the process. You can also check at the county tax assessor's office for property ownership. Verify professional licenses, etc., real estate brokers, building contractors, or attorneys at that state level. Hey, Dan, do you really go through all this investigation? You bet. By the time I'm sitting down to hammer out a deal with this individual or a team of people, I'm going to have a file on every one of them. If one of these mooches has a birthday coming up, for instance, I'll know about it and make damn sure we're still negotiating late that afternoon so he's under pressure to make a deal and get to his birthday party. Author's note. All this investigative procedure, almost all of it can be done on the internet via Google, and almost all the records that I've mentioned you can find on the internet. End of author's note. Step 3, investigate specifics. Recheck your sources for details you might have missed. Then, if you're in doubt about your sources, investigate them. Go deeper. If you're about to risk millions, don't think twice about probing beneath the calm surface waters of an opportunity, straightforward company or individual. Before you bring in a partner, for example, check not only with the previous associates who may give you a prepared story, but with the employees who might give you a different perspective. Does this guy drink too much at parties? Does he do drugs? How is he to work for? Does he abuse employees? Does he beat his wife? Does he chase skirts around the office? Is he gay? Remember, you're not gathering information for a testimonial dinner in his honor. You're just running the fingers over the fabric of his business and personal life, feeling for stitches that are out of place. Maybe you don't care if he's a cross-dresser, but you need to know. Author's note. In 2016, obviously, sexual bias, as long as it stays out of the workplace, is of no concern. End of author's note. By the way, in case you haven't noticed, I've talked throughout this book in the male gender. One reason is that I'm not going to stop and say he or she every time just to mollify the politically correct crowd. Another is habit. It is inescapable fact that 98% of America and the UK and Europe's top executives are men. This book is not about equal opportunity. It's about making money. But if you're more concerned about the ditzy details of political correctness, you probably already tossed this book away. Having said that, if you're a woman, I encourage you to push beyond the gender issue in the knowledge of the number of women business owners and entrepreneurs grow every year. And if you're gotten this far, you're a serious player and potential to make your ton of money. So stick to your guns. Reinvestigate and continue to check throughout the negotiating period which may follow. As a matter of fact, your interest, once it's discovered, could generate a flurry of cosmetic actions by the target, filings, financial shuffling, or other activity you need to know about. Targets of investigation, especially in business, are moving targets. Companies and individuals continue to leave tracks as they move forward in time. Never take your eye off the target while you're aiming at it. Step 4, commit to the idea. It's one accomplishment to ensure that every member of your dream team holds the same idea you do. Your objectives, how they relate to your long-range vision, your good strategy to achieve your objectives, and even some of the tactics and maneuvers you may have in mind. It's quite another feat to begin lining up commitments to get into the fight if it begins and to see it through. An acquisition deal, even for a world-class specialist like Dan Pena, is not a picnic. Your partners and your top executives should be required to commit themselves publicly to the project at the outset. Given the individual knowledge, experience, and personalities of any group sitting around the conference table in the world, you're bound to get variant reactions. It's inevitable unless you surrounded yourself with the lobotomized sycophants. If some of your people have reservations, if there is some facet of the project they're uneasy over, they need to get it on the table so that it can be dealt with and overcome, or at least acknowledged. Even I, with all my self-confidence, have tinges of misgiving sometimes. Sidebar, stick to the knitting. You want to deploy your asset, resources, and capabilities in your areas of expertise and experience. The preliminary decision-making time is when you ask yourself, is this an area in which I have any access to real expertise? When Pat Kennedy and I were partners in building a vertically integrated oil company, we strayed into areas of the oil industry we didn't know beans about and paid dearly for the experience. One of the lessons I learned was stick to your knitting. Deploy your assets, resources, and capabilities in areas of your expertise and experience. I thought a lot about that lesson as I now considered moving into the coal business. I ultimately decided to proceed with the acquisition on the strength of another Pena business rule. Dream big, think big, be big. Besides, my instincts and intuition were screaming, this one's hot. Pamela was so close I could touch her. There may be cases where one of your key people simply cannot buy into the idea. For whatever reason, that individual is opposed to the project you know will launch your quantum leap to super success. Even before you make a final decision, you need to ascertain whether the individual is going to perform his duties and responsibilities regardless of personal feelings, or whether his opposition is going to become a dead weight, a counterproductive stumbling block, a negotiating battle that will follow. During the preliminary discussions about the acquisition of Bow Valley, for example, my executive vice president of exploration resisted the idea of getting into the coal business. Frankly, he didn't like the prospect of his oil and gas division taking a back seat to a newly acquired operation. When he realized that we were moving ahead with or without him, he eventually came over and even convinced himself the project was his idea. Whatever works. Step 5, making the preliminary decision. Your dream team, including those with questions and uncertainties, buys into the commitment and makes it their own. Make it clear that this is not the final decision, but a working consensus or agreement to move ahead. Your investigations thus far have turned up no red flags which would cause you to reconsider or walk away from the deal. The deal still looks red hot. You have begun to prepare for battle. It is at this point in the preliminary stages of the process that your people have to become obsessed with an idea that is now going to rise like a monster, assume a life of its own, and dominate their waking hours for weeks and months. You're the leader, so now you have to be the cheerleader. I was called the Vince Lombardi of the oil business. You got to help your team get absolutely psyched up, generating enough energy, adrenaline, and momentum so that when the battle is joined, they suck up their pantyhose and charge into the cannon with no thought of defeat, fatigue, hunger, sex, or any other preoccupation. If that means stringing banners across the conference room, or pep rallies, or promises of bonuses when the deal is done, do it. Do it all. But ignite that obsession so that your people, from your partners to the mail clerk, know it's not business as usual. You're on war footing, and like MacArthur said, there's no substitute for victory. For the record, my warriors at Great Western made me proud. We never lost a battle, nor knew how to lose. We acted as if we had no limits to our abilities. That became our war cry. If you want similar results, you should act the same. Step 6, continue the investigation. This is not a redundant step. Frankly, your investigation, whether staff, people, or an outside firm, should continue their work for as long as your project is a viable one. By definition, you don't trust the poor bastards you are trying to buy, nor those who may be competing with you for an acquisition. You simply don't believe anything they tell you or that you hear or read about anyone, since all parties are now posturing to be in the best negotiating position. Over the course of a major deal, you'll be bluffed and bullshitted and plain lied to, directly and indirectly. You'll be lied about as well, where hundreds of millions of dollars are on the line, or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. Integrity is usually the first casualty. Make sure it's not yours. If it sounds cutthroat, I've made my point. It is. Author's note: as I've said from the beginning of my career and from the beginning of my coaching career in 1993, if it's honest, legal, moral, and ethical, and you're not hurting anybody's feelings on purpose, we'll do it. End of author's note. As you can see by now, those 11 steps are not necessarily sequential. In many cases, they run parallel. Investigation never stops. Affirmations of your goal should be continuous. Your pep talks, your obvious enthusiasm, your total commitment, all service to replenish the emotional drain on everyone in your organization for as long as it takes, even unto death, to consummate your deal, or in our case, for the minnow to swallow the whale. Step 7, formulate your plan. There comes a time in your planning and talking when you have to draw the line in the conference room carpet. Every indicator, every director, every partner may say go, but you have to push the button or pull the trigger. Once you're convinced you can do the deal, you can almost feel your toes digging in, muscles tightening to make that quantum leap. You may have to persuade, cajole, beg, scream, and bully, whatever it takes to make all the partners step over the line in final commitment. Chances are, however, you've chosen partners with the same clear vision and sense of mission you have. So at some point in strategizing, everybody sort of looks at each other and knows in his gut, God, we're going for it. You put your heads together, load your guns, and count to 3 and come out smoking. Come out smoking like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. It's a magical moment, but that fusion of minds, spirit, and souls is a rush you'll continue to search forever. Author's note: in recent years, we've adjusted Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid analogy to rush towards a gunfire and kill everything there. Of course, it's metaphor. End of author's note. And before it's all over, you'll be going to need all the magic you can get. Once you've recommitted and your company is committed, it's up to you to keep initial momentum at fever pitch, regardless of the roadblocks, snags, and ambushes you run into. You never, by word or groan, express a doubt. As I've said before, I may be wrong, but I'm never in doubt. Even the slightest negative reaction can rip like wildfire through your company's morale. During the periods of high company stress, employees who are working hard as hell for you need a constant reassurance that everything's going to be all right. Like little kangaroos, they want to stay in the warm pouch. Give them that pouch. I learned this lesson the hard way. During the heat of negotiations over Bow Valley, USA, I made a usual commitment to one of my associates to the effect it was looking pretty touch and go right now. Then I flew off somewhere on business. My associates mentioned my comment to his wife. She ran into another wife over the health club and told her by the time I got back, I had all but Harry Carey in the hallways. The word was out that the CEO himself were going to lose this deal. We're going down to defeat. I stomped through the offices, stomped out the fire, and relearned a lesson I already knew. Share hope, share a dream, but never share a doubt. At this point, you begin to formulate your action plan. This is the blueprint that keeps you pointing in the general direction you want to be headed as you travel through the process of the deal. The first step of your action plan is define your desired outcome. What do you want? What do you need to get out of the deal? The answer is not something big like a lot of money or a bigger share of the market. Have your pencil-necked analysts run several what-if scenarios that spit out your worst-case optimum and best-case results. Number and write down the elements of your desired outcome. Start with whiteboard in your conference room in front of your decision makers. Make hard copies and distribute them to associates and staff. All those who are going to be busting their chops for the next several weeks or months need to know what you want come out of the nights and weekends that you're asking them to sacrifice. Step 2 in your action plan is define your pay price to action. Remember, your pay price to action is how much you're willing to pay to forfeit in order to achieve growth. Even the sweetest deal, unless you're a purse snatcher, requires that you give up something in order to gain something. If you don't decide in advance how far you're willing to go, how large a price you're willing to pay. The momentum of the events later in the heat of negotiation could well push you into giving away the store. Define your parameters now and stick with them. Step 8. Establish your critical path. By this time in your action plan, you and your other decision makers need to chart the critical path, the sequence of events which must fall into the place for you to achieve success. You also need to set up an instrument by which to measure your progress and towards success. How in the hell can you know where you're at any given time if you don't know where you're supposed to be? Like a construction manager or a project engineer, for example, you develop a flow chart, an optimum timeline for securing the bridge financing, nailing down loan guarantees, starting face-to-face negotiations. You need measurement because it gives you a sense of discipline and order. And often battle is joined when the smoke of a corporate combat obscures your field. You're suddenly struggling to hand with both foes and fair weather financial friends, and you're calling in air support on yourself to kill the bastards so the deal can live. You're going to need all the discipline and order you can muster. Step 3 of your action plan requires you to modify your plan as necessary. The route to the best deal you can make is not a straight shot across the open field. Minds change, spirits fail, rates rise, alliances crumble, conditions change, and you have to react quickly and cleverly to every twist in the road. In my seminars, I tell my audiences to think of a rocket that takes off from Earth, headed for, say, a rendezvous with Jupiter. The son of a bitch is off course 95% of the time. Technicians on the Earth are continuously beaming up mid-course corrections to affect coordinates in deep space they never dreamed of. Think of your deal as a great juggernaut hurtling through time in approximately the right direction. You just have to keep nudging it to hit the ideals expressed in your desired outcome. Author's note. In recent years, the rocket ships or the ships that are going to the various places in outer space are not 95% off course. Technology has gotten much better, but the principle still holds true. End of author's note. Step 9. Implement and follow up. That means don't take anything for granted or anyone, even your key decision makers. Your most trusted and reliable partner, being human, can let a detail slip, forget a phone call, overlook a loose end. Even though most solemn pledges of support from others are often made on shifting sand. Don't take anything for granted or anyone, even your key decision makers. Check every detail yourself. In order to relate how minds and loyalties change, let me give you a little example. We had originally had a mind to purchase just oil and gas assets of Bow Valley, USA. But NAPCO shunned our interest in our joint venture acquisition. They treated us like pesky little kid. Pissed me off. But I saw their rejection of Great Western as an opportunity to go for the whole company. Of course, we hadn't set up the financing for the oil and gas. We hadn't set up financing for the oil and gas assets yet. But this was an opportunity staring us in the missionary position, and we jumped on it. The complexities of pursuing a multi-million-dollar business deal are akin to the constructing of a giant house of cards. Every link at every level has to hold in place simultaneously. A high-performance individual must have the tact, patience, strength, and delicacy to add one card after another without the whole damn thing collapsing, and the clarity of eye to catch trembling, wavering elements and shore them up before they snap and fall. That's where the follow-up becomes a fine art. Great Western's largest shareholder was an arm of the Kuwaiti government. Although only one guarantor was initially required, the Canadian owners of Bow Valley, USA, insisted that both our largest shareholder, the Kuwaitis, and our stock brokerage firm in London guarantee the deal. The Kuwaitis had reluctantly agreed to guarantee the entire transaction, but suddenly they were backing away from their agreement because they didn't want their name disclosed in the documents. Meanwhile, our brokerage firm in London was going through senior personnel changes, and allies in the deal were replaced by other company personnel we weren't so familiar with. I flew to London to study up our friends, and negotiations began in Los Angeles, handled for us by Mark. Why Los Angeles and not our office in Denver, or better yet, our office in Houston or London? Because Mark's wife was about to have a baby in L.A. Nice gesture, bad mistake. Finally, just as I got the guarantees and Charlie got the bridge financing in New York, negotiations for the parent company, Bow Valley USA, closed their briefcases and walked out on Mark in Los Angeles. They were actually heading for LA Airport while I was holding the board meeting in London to secure approval for the deal. The final outcome of what was becoming an intercontinental fiasco is not so important here as the fact that I had constantly follow up almost hour by hour on events in New York, London, where the Kuwaitis were, and Los Angeles. Step 9 says you never ever take the smallest detail for granted. The greatest victory for final, the closest ally for loyal. Many in the millions turns good men, companies, and countries into snakes and weasels. Greed turns men into beasts and beasts into men. You've implemented all the process, investigated yet again, followed up, and checked every commitment for leaks, and you're ready to begin. Step 10, execute. Bombay's doors are open. Your supporting elements of financing and guarantees are in place. Hopefully by the time you sit down in the boardroom across from your adversaries to begin negotiations. At this point, more than any other, you have to lead from the front. No more phone calls from your home office. No more faxing instructions. No more emails. Your intimidating presence, your scrawling face, your hardened, blood-splattered determination must stand in person, laser beam focused before the enemy across the table. If execution still isn't feasible, one or more of your previous 9 steps was a misstep. That's why you need step 11, review and reevaluate. Return to review every detail on steps 1 through 10. Tighten the bolts of every phase. Chances are you'll run across some glitch, some uncrossed T or undotted I from the weeks or months ago, which now prevents you from taking this execution step. 6 days had passed since the team from Canada had packed up and left Mark in L.A. Our Kuwaiti associates had lost face and were fuming. Foreign tax issues had arisen. Now the Canadian government ostensibly had to approve any deal. My executive VP of exploration was running through the corridors of Great Western saying, "I told you so." Even our own auditors had recomputed real taxable income before and after the proposed acquisition, completely changing our projected rate of return. The whole deal was disappearing down the crapper. Conventional wisdom pronounced it dead. Imagine what Dan Penny had to say about that. Author's note, I said fuck probably 100 times. End of author's note. During those 6 days of hell, I took direct command of the littered battlefield and began offensive of threatened injunctions, motions, and filings in New York, California, and Canada. I promised to sue every moron on the Canadian board of directors, their mothers, and their unborn children. I spent more than $100,000 in legal fees in 48 hours. And on the 7th day at work, pouting Canadians in Great Western with key advisors led by Dan Pena convened in one room around a 40-foot conference table. Our team of 6 stood against their team of 20. Our lead transitional lawyer was Rick Scott, one of my first disciples, who went on to found a $20 billion healthcare corporation at one time, the largest in the world. And author's note, I pleasantly say, Rick Scott is the second term governor of the state of Florida, which will be a swing state in the current election between Clinton and Trump. And eventually, at a closing, he said, Dan, I need to make money like you. What can I do? And I said, you got to leave me, Rick. He asked me, what should you do? And I said, healthcare and telecommunications, which meant internet as well. And he took the advice of healthcare, and the rest is history. End of author's note. We had met their demand to hold talks at their lawyer's office, but I took control. I stood, looked every Canadian in the eye, and told them that we would either breathe life back into this deal or crash the son of a bitch out of existence. And nobody leaves this room until one or the other has occurred. We had trash cans in the corners of the room to serve as urinals, period. And so it began. From the outset, no figure, no projections provided by Bow Valley parent company was taken at face value. Our accountants, Coopers and Lybrand, had combed through the financials, and the Canadians were required to provide us. And by the time that we sat down, we had a clearer physical picture of Bow Valley USA than its own parent company. Author's note, Coopers and Lybrand has since become PricewaterhouseCoopers, and they've served me very well, and Charlie Soliday was a former partner of Coopers and Lybrand. End of author's note. Bitter arguments erupted like gunfire at the slightest provocation. As an example, their books showed net operating loss $10 million to $12 million, on which we figured to pay maybe 50 cents on the dollar. It was built into our purchase price. Then they announced the new NOL, estimated at 50 to 60 million, and demanded the same 50-cent payment. That was insane, out of the question. To agree to such a demand would jack the purchase price far beyond our ability to pay and collapse our tediously constructed house of cards. We raged in disagreement. Our attorney advised us, don't roll on this, Dan. Don't cave in. Screw 'em. Let's walk. But we were committed. We had to fight, so we charged. We eventually discovered closer to $100 million in NOLs, even more than the damn Canadians had figured. And we wound up paying 10 cents on the dollar. Finally, 72 hours and 2 fistfights after we'd begun, the deal was done. No one was ready for this kind of gut-wrenching ordeal we lived through. No previous experience could have conditioned any of us, including me, for what happened in the name of negotiation. Anyone who was there during those 3-day, dark day, December days will never forget it. I get goosebumps. Bottom line, Great Western paid $116 for Bow Valley's coal operation and $25 million for their oil and gas interests. Additional oil and gas assets cost us another $7 million. We raised $168 million in cash, $85 million in short-term loans, and $85 million from Series B preference shares of Great Western stock, which were gobbled up by the Kuwaiti friends. Great Western kept another $20 million for future projects. Author's note, the overfinancing is something that I preach today and have since the beginning of my career. And if the deals are structured properly and the financial institutions are given the proper information, all legal, moral, and ethical, you can overfinance transactions. End of author's note. It was quite a cost to pay. It took a minnow years to digest the whale, but at the interim report, Great Western shareholders in March 1987, we presented total assets of $272 million and some change, a quantum leap growth of $191 million from the previous fiscal year of $81 million. Another cost, Charlie was dead within a month. Remember, you are always responsible for your decisions. That's why I put important disclaimers at the front of this book. Author's note, Charlie's death shook the company to its very foundation. It took us a year or a year and a half to ultimately replace him with 4 different people. End of author's note.